Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson on planning schedule, Part 1. This lesson covers the 5 schedule planning processes. They start with plan schedule management, which has as its primary output the schedule management plan. Then define activities, which has as its primary outputs the activity list, the activity attributes, and the milestone list. Sequence activities then outputs your project schedule network diagrams, followed by estimate activity durations, which outputs your duration estimates and your basis of estimates, and finally the develop schedule process, which outputs your schedule baseline, your project schedule, your schedule data, and any and all project calendars. The objective of these schedule planning processes is to develop the schedule, as well as the schedule management plan. Your schedule can be either predictive or agile in its approach, but these processes and their tools and techniques will apply equally well to agile as they do to a predictive approach. As we go through these different tools and techniques, you'll see how they can apply to both predictive and agile approaches. An agile approach will apply these tools and techniques a little differently and add other tools and techniques as well, but these are still foundational principles. For smaller projects, you can usually combine the processes of define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity durations, and develop schedule, and do them all at once. But because the tools and techniques are distinct, they are presented as separate processes. It's important as you create your schedule that you keep it as flexible as possible. This is to accommodate new information that you may learn during the course of the project. You may learn more about the details of the requirements and the project scope, or the costs involved, or the resources available. Also, risks and opportunities may change during the life cycle of the project, and your schedule should be flexible enough to accommodate these sorts of changes. First up is the plan schedule management process. The main output is the schedule management plan, which establishes all of the policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, developing, managing, executing, and controlling the project schedule, which means that the schedule management plan should be established before you proceed with the other schedule planning activities. As you think about the output of the schedule management plan, consider what inputs could help you to put together that plan. What do you have that you can and should use? First and foremost, you have the project charter, which includes the summary milestone schedule that was developed during project initiation. You also have the scope management plan and development approach that have been developed as part of the scope management processes. In addition, you have several enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets that we'll get to in just a moment. But notice it does not include the work breakdown structure and requirements and other information about scope that you would need in order to put together a schedule. Why are those not included here? Shouldn't they be? Actually, no. The key here is to remember that the schedule management plan is the rule book for how you're going to create the schedule and how you're going to manage it, but it does not include the details of the schedule. And so it doesn't need the details of the scope, not yet. That comes as part of later processes. Recall that the development approach is whether you're going to use a predictive life cycle or a more iterative or adaptive life cycle such as Agile. That development approach will definitely affect the approach you use in developing the schedule and the tools and processes that you follow in developing and controlling the schedule. The list of enterprise environmental factors begins with organizational culture and structure. This makes sense, of course, because if you have an organization that is more functionally organized, that means that the project manager will have little or no authority, and this will affect your ability to schedule the resources that you need. On the other hand, if the organization is more project-oriented, you'll have a lot more authority and a lot more control over the resources and their scheduling. In the middle, you have matrix organizations, in which this power is shared between the project manager and the functional managers. You may also be affected by whether or not you have a project management office and whether that PMO is more of a supportive, controlling, or directive PMO, indicating how much influence that PMO has within the organization and how much ability you have as a project manager to schedule the resources that you need when you need them. You should also factor in team resource availability and skills. For example, how much lead time or notice do you need to provide in order to get the resources you need? And when you get those resources, can you have them full-time or only part-time? Can you have them long-term or only short-term? All of these will affect your resources and your scheduling. And the same goes for physical resources as well as for team resources. Your organization will likely either provide you and specify which scheduling software you use, or may provide you with some options, some choices on which software you use, or in some cases, you may have free rein to choose whatever scheduling software you would like. Your organization may also have some guidelines for how to tailor the project management processes, specifically your schedule planning and your schedule. And don't forget that there are some very useful commercial databases out there that can provide you with some standard estimating data for your project. As always, historical information found in your lessons learned repository and elsewhere within your organization are an important organizational process asset. So they're at the top of the list. In addition to specifying which scheduling software you can use, your organization will perhaps also have some existing formal or informal schedule development or management or control related policies, procedures, and guidelines. These may be written down or communicated verbally, information that you can get from your PMO or other project managers in your organization. In addition to samples of previous schedules from previous projects in your lessons learned repository, your organization may also have some templates and forms that you can use, including guidance on how to use them. Again, these are things that you can get from your PMO, other project managers, as well as from your program or portfolio. And finally, your organization may already have some useful monitoring and reporting tools that you can use to keep an eye on your schedule and report its progress to key stakeholders. As with so many other processes, we have expert judgment at the top of the list of tools and techniques for the plan schedule management process. There may be many people within your organization that have particular expertise in scheduling projects. There are some people who have the role of being a schedule coordinator, and that's their full-time job, is to manage schedules all the time. These people may be able to provide you with valuable guidance, or they may make a good team member. There may be others in your organization that have experience with exactly this type of project, its size or the type of industry that it's in or what it's specializing in. And these people may be able to provide you with some guidance on how to put together a schedule. They may have some lessons learned of their own that they can give to you. Some project managers in your organization may be experts in specific scheduling methodologies, such as Agile. Others may be expert in different types of scheduling software tools. You may also be able to learn some of these things from experts from outside your organization, either by meeting with them face-to-face, contacting them over the phone or by email, or by searching online. Not surprisingly, meetings is next on the list. Putting together a schedule is going to involve an awful lot of meetings with key stakeholders, including your sponsor, your team members, and other stakeholders on the project. Though it's not listed here, you will need your interpersonal and team skills for managing all of these different meetings. And you'll also use the technique of alternatives analysis as you consider all of the different possible ways in which you could put together your schedule management plan. You'll need to choose amongst all of these alternatives. You'll need to choose between different types of methodologies and different tools, and also, importantly, the level of detail that you have in your project schedule. You need to have enough detail that you can manage it well, but not so much detail that it's too much of a burden to keep track of it all. Just like breaking down the WBS into the appropriate level of detail that makes it most manageable, you need to follow the same principle here as you're putting together your schedule and its level of detail. You'll also need to choose between different time frames that are applicable to your project. If you're going to have iterations or time boxes, how long those should be, whether they should be of consistent duration or different durations based on the type of work that's going to be done in each of these time boxes or phases. Now, here's a quick quiz for you. How much do you remember of the inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques of the plan schedule management process? Do you remember how many outputs there are and what they are? What are the inputs? Take a moment to see how much you can remember and write down. And here's the summary. It has one output, and that is the schedule management plan itself. The main input is the project charter, but also the project management plan's components of the scope management plan and the development approach, so that you know what sort of approach you're taking to match your overall project development approach. There are also several enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets that can influence or help you on your project. Tools and techniques is a very simple list. You have expert judgment, of course. Don't forget to consult with those that can help. There will be lots of meetings, and you'll be choosing between different alternatives. Once you have your schedule management plan in place, that will give you the guidance and direction and rules that you need to follow the remainder of the schedule management activities, particularly for planning, starting with the define activities process. The outputs of the define activities process include primarily the activity list, of course, and the activity attributes to go along with that activity list, and a milestone list. A key concept to keep in mind here is that you're going to be decomposing the work packages that you put together when you did the WBS and organizing those into schedule activities. Remember that the work packages are the deliverables, not the activities, and that we held off earlier on getting down to the level of specifying activities. And now is the point at which we do get to that level of detail and identify those activities needed to accomplish those work packages. And those go into or connect with the framework of the work breakdown structure. The define activities process has as its main input the scope baseline, which includes the project scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the WBS dictionary. The work breakdown structure because that's the framework that you'll use to identify all of the different work packages and all of the activities that are needed to complete those work packages. You'll need the dictionary in order to have all of those details that you need in order to identify those activities, and the project scope statement, which provides you more detail about which requirements were selected. The schedule management plan is, of course, also an input because it will provide you the guidance that you have determined earlier on how you're going to do all of your schedule planning, including defining activities. And there are a number of enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets that are inputs as well. Organizational process assets include some standard templates that you could use or processes for identifying activities. Your lessons learned repository may also contain examples from previous projects of activities that you can use to start off your activity list. And your organization may include, especially if you have a PMO or your program or portfolio has defined some of the policies and procedures and guidelines for activity planning. You may even have a formal methodology that you've adopted. Tools and techniques include expert judgment, of course, decomposition, because you're going to follow the same sort of process that you did when breaking down the work breakdown structure. You'll take these work package deliverables and identify the activities, and those activities may have sub-activities and so on. In fact, you could do this at the same time that you're creating the work breakdown structure, or you could do it afterwards. But either way, it involves this same technique of decomposition. Meetings are another key element, and you'll need all of your meeting skills and rolling wave planning, which you recall is the idea that you may not have all of the detail up front, and there may be areas that need refinement later on as you go. So not only may you have some scope that isn't fully defined yet, you may also have some portions of your schedule that aren't fully defined yet, and you elaborate on those as you learn more during the life cycle of the project. This is known as rolling wave planning, which applies equally well to both scope and schedule planning. Okay, it's time for a quick review. How much do you remember of the define activities processes inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques? Remember to start with the outputs. Think about what those inputs would be that would help you generate those outputs, and what tools and techniques you would use in that process. And here is the list. Starting with outputs, the activity list, the activity attributes, and the milestone list. There are a couple here that we didn't mention. Change requests. Of course, you'll see change requests as an output from many processes, because as you go through these planning processes, especially as you're revisiting them and you already have elements of your project plan that have been baselined, in order to change those things that have been baselined, you'll need to submit a change request. Many different processes have change requests as a possible output, especially in planning. Also, your work to create a schedule or to define activities may require that you make some updates to your schedule baseline or cost baseline. Going along with change requests, those and others may need to be changed. The inputs that would be useful include your schedule management plan, of course, and your scope baseline. If your scope baseline has been completed, if not, you can use the version that hasn't been baselined yet. You can use however much of the scope is defined at this point. Plus, enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. Tools and techniques, relatively short list. Of course, you have expert judgment and meetings there.
decomposition, because you're following similar processes to what you did when you were breaking down the scope, and rolling wave planning.
And that's it for part 1. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.